Nowadays, these dating norms seem outdated and some even shocking. But back in the 70s, they were completely normal. Let's take a look at the 10 most surprising dating norms of the 70s, which few would take seriously today. Watch until the end and tell us which of these norms you think are still right. The man always pays on a date. In the 1970s, dating looked quite different than it does today. Back then, it was expected that the man not only asked the woman out, but also cover the entire cost of the date. This was an unspoken rule. Men would plan the evening, choose the restaurant, and handle all the expenses. If a woman offered to pay, it could be seen as an insult. Many men viewed it as a blow to their pride. Today, the dynamic has changed, with more couples splitting the bill or taking turns paying. Want to know what other dating norm existed back then? Women waited for the man to call. In the 70s, it was customary for women to wait for the man to call after a date. If a guy didn't call, all they could do was hope and wait. Some women would wait for weeks, hesitant to take the initiative. Back then, making the first move was considered strictly a man's responsibility. If a woman dared to call first, it was seen as improper and even desperate. Many feared that such behavior would scare a man away. Today, those rules seem odd, and there's no stigma attached to a woman's taking the initiative. But that's not the only dating norm from those days. Want to know what else was common back then? Blind dates arranged by friends. Blind dates were quite popular in the 1970s, and they were still usually set up by friends or acquaintances. It worked like this. Your friends would promise to introduce you to someone perfect at a party or a social event. You'd show up knowing nothing about the person and hope they'd be a good match. The problem was that you knew almost nothing about your date before meeting them. This sometimes led to awkward situations where people turned out to be completely incompatible. Today, with the rise of technology and social media, we have more ways to learn about someone beforehand. Here's another thing that used to be completely normal back then. Long waits between dates. In the 1970s, dates didn't happen as quickly as they do now. After the first date, it was normal to wait several days, sometimes even a week, before meeting again. The man might take his time, while the woman was expected to patiently wait for him to ask her out again. Those were the rules. No one wanted to seem too eager. These long waits could last so long that people would sometimes lose interest in each other. Yet they followed these unspoken rules, afraid to break social norms. Today, such long pauses between dates seem unusual. Most people prefer to stay in touch and meet more frequently. Here's another defining feature of dating back then. Waiting for marriage to live together. It was completely normal in the 1970s for couples to wait until marriage before living together. Cohabitation before marriage was considered improper and could even lead to societal judgment. In some U.S. states, there were laws that officially prohibited unmarried couples from living together. If a couple decided to live together before marriage, they often hid it from friends and family to avoid disapproval. This attitude made the process of starting a family more stressful, as many couples had no idea what it was like to live together until they were already married. Today, those rules seem strange and outdated, but this wasn't the only unusual norm of the time. It was also common that the man makes the first move at dances. At dances, everything was quite predictable. Men were expected to make the first move. They were the ones who approached women and asked them to dance. For men, this was an essential ritual. It was seen as a way to demonstrate confidence and strength. Meanwhile, women waited for an invitation, as it wasn't considered proper for them to ask a man to dance. If a woman dared to take the first step and ask a man to dance, she risked being seen as too forward. Such behavior could turn off both the man and discourage her from trying again. Today, these rules seem outdated. and anyone can take the initiative on the dance floor. Another interesting aspect of relationships back then was that parents actively involved in choosing a partner. In the 1970s, parents played a much more significant role in choosing their children's partners than they do today. Young people often discussed their relationships with their parents and even sought their advice before dating someone seriously. Parents had considerable influence and could intervene if they felt someone wasn't right for their son or daughter. Some parents even arranged blind dates for their children, hoping it would help them find the right partner. If they didn't approve of who their child was dating, they might openly pressure them to end the relationship. Today, such involvement in personal life seems overly intrusive, but back then, it was the norm. Want to know what else was considered normal? Sexual harassment on dates was often ignored. In the 1970s, the issue of sexual harassment on dates was rarely discussed, and such situations were often simply ignored. Men could behave in a pushy or intrusive way, considering it normal in a romantic context. Unwanted touching or overly aggressive attempts to get close weren't taken as seriously as they are today. Women felt obligated to stay silent and tolerate this behavior. Complaining openly or saying no was seen as inappropriate, and many didn't know how to defend themselves in such situations. Society offered little support for women who experienced harassment on dates. Today, these norms seem shocking, but they were part of the reality back then. What do you think? Another notable aspect of that era was that women were expected to show interest modestly. Women were often told they should express interest in a man very cautiously and modestly. It was believed that if a woman showed too much interest, she risked scaring him away. Girls were advised to be more mysterious and wait for the man to make the first move or take the lead. This often led to confusion. Men sometimes couldn't tell if a woman was truly interested because her behavior was too subtle. These games ended up complicating relationships. Today, such rules seem outdated, as both people can openly show their interest without hesitation. Strict gender roles on dates. In the 1970s, dating was shaped by clear gender roles that dictated how men and women should behave. Men were expected to be the leaders. They asked women out, planned the evening, and paid for everything. Women, on the other hand, played a passive role. They waited for the invitation and acted reserved. This model reinforced stereotypes, with men seen as protectors and providers, while women were viewed as weak and dependent. If a woman tried to take the initiative or didn't follow these rules, she could face social judgment. People might label her as too assertive or even risk damaging her reputation. Today, this is no longer the case, and what was once considered normal is now seen as an outdated standard. These dating and relationship rules from the 70s are quite different from how we approach dating today. What do you think about these norms? Do you believe things were better back then? Is there anything you remember or that surprised you? Share your memories and thoughts in the comments. Maybe you have your own stories about how dating rules have changed over the years.